Okay, as was said, tonight's Torah portion is Shelach, which translates in a very, very peculiar way. It says, you send, or send for yourself. It's different than just to send. And there's a reason for that, which we will discover in tonight's Torah portion. So Shelach, send for yourself, or you send. Numbers chapter 13, 1 to 15, 41 is the Torah portion. So last week we began to look at some instances of rebellion in the camp of Israel and how that began to affect Israel in a very broad context. Now to that point last week, there had been several cases of rebellion before that, where Israel would grumble against God and express displeasure with him. The two instances, actually three of them, but what we looked at last week was pretty intense, right? We looked at the final one that we saw was with Miriam and Aaron challenged Moses, but they did it secretly, which is sort of amazing. God, and it's again, I'm reflecting back on that. They were grumbling about Moses. They were talking about the fact that he had married a Cushite woman. This was a huge affront to them. But it's incredible where it says that God heard them. Moses didn't hear them. They didn't bring that to Moses. God heard them. So they were sitting in their private place or something and just discussing Moses. And that was rebellion. That God took offense to that. And it's incredible how offended God was. He reacted instantly against Miriam and against Aaron. So we're going to see that tonight there is, again, more instances of rebellion. Specifically, two of them tonight again. So I have a couple of other Hebrew words for us, other than Shelach, which is, the first one is lun, and it really means to grumble, to express displeasure, to grumble, lun. The other Hebrew word I have here is nasar. Nasar is to test, to put to test. And those two words are in tonight's Torah portion, lun and nasar, and we'll see this. So I have 3 points of interest again. These Torah portions are so replete with points of interest. It's hard sometimes to choose just 3. So let me give you the 3 points of interest that we will look at tonight. The 12 spies, whose idea was it? Right, so we'll dig into that one. An evil report incurs God's wrath. And the third point of interest, Moses' courage to approach God. So those are the 3 points of interest that I've extracted from tonight's Torah portion, which we will get right into. So the first point of interest, the 12 spies, whose idea was it? So based on what was read from the Torah portion a few moments ago, it might appear that this was God's idea, but it wasn't. This was not God's initiative. God did not need people to spy out the land for him. He knew the land. He knew what was there. What we're going to discover tonight is that it was Israel and their lack of faith and hope and trust in God that brought them to the place where they did go out to spy out the land. And we'll see this here very clearly. But in the text, it doesn't appear that way. And there's a reason for that. So let's dig right into it. Numbers chapter 13, tonight's Torah portion begins there. And we're going to read 1 and 2. Again, when you hear this, or we've heard it before tonight, you get the impression that this was God's initiative. I want to tell you, just as it was in a previous Torah portion, God facilitated Israel in their rebellion in order to teach them a lesson. What was that case of rebellion? When they rejected the manna. They wanted the leeks and the lemons and the onions and all of the good things that they had in Egypt. And God said, you do. I'm going to give you meat. I'm going to give you so much of it, it'll come through your nose. So there are times when God will hold his people accountable for their choices by giving them what they want. And there's a tremendous value in teaching that way. Parents, have you ever employed that system, that tact in teaching? I have. You see, there comes a time when you realize that someone that you're responsible for, is determined to do something. And the discernment of God says that that person is going to do it whether you approve or not. So the solution is, let them do it. Even facilitate them in doing it, so that they can come to the end of it and hopefully learn something. I've employed that in my life before, not only with my children, but in my place of employment. And sometimes it's very, very effective. In fact, most often it's very effective if it's done right. And this is what God is doing here with Israel. He did it with the quails, and he's going to do it again with the 10 spies. So let's read chapter 13, verse 1 and 2. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send out for yourself. In other words, if you read this in the Hebrew correctly, you send for yourself. In other words, I am not sending. You for yourself send out, is how it reads. Send out for yourself men, so that they may spy out the land of Canaan, which I am going to give to the sons of Israel. You shall send a man from each of their fathers' tribes, every one a leader among them. And so Moses went ahead and did that. It was God who determined that a leader from every tribe will go out. What is he doing? He's preparing to hold them accountable based on their choice. God knew what was coming. He knew that it wasn't a good idea for them to spy out the land, but it was in their hearts to do it. Now, in Deuteronomy chapter 1, it is revealed that it was Israel who wanted to spy out the land. Why? Because of their lack of faith. They couldn't trust God. They couldn't trust that God was leading them. And it's an amazing thing. What did God do for Israel in Egypt? He broke the yoke of the Egyptians. 10 plagues. 10 blows against Egypt. Set them free. And here is Israel on the threshold now, Kadesh Barnea, on the threshold of entering into the land, and they can't trust him. Just go forward, Israel. This is what God had already determined for them. Enter, take the land. Liat, slowly, slowly. Instead, they requested to send spies in. Reconnaissance. Why would an army send reconnaissance into a given area? Because they're unsure. They don't feel particularly convinced that they can have a victory. That's what reconnaissance is, isn't it? To plot out an approach. Well, they were actually denying God by looking for reconnaissance. God was more than able to lead them through the land. This was God's initiative. But they had a different thing in mind. So let's read in Deuteronomy chapter 1. Moses here speaking to Israel. Then all of you approached me and said, let us send men before us that may search out the land for us, and bring back to us a word of the way by which we should go up, and the cities which we shall enter. The thing pleased me, and I took 12 of your men, one from each tribe. They turned and they went into the hill country and came back to Eshcol, came back from the valley of Eshcol and spied it out. Then they took some of the fruit of the land in their hands and brought it down to us, and they brought us back a report and said, it is a good land which the Lord your God is about to give us. But you see, verse 21 is very clear, isn't it? It states there very clearly that they, Israel, initiated this. It wasn't God. God said, this is what you want to do. You've set your mind to do it. You can't trust me. You can't rely upon me. This is not going to be good. But go for it. And that's why it says, Shelach. You send for yourself, is what God said. In other words, you need this, then go. Shelach. All right, so let's read verse 22 again, just to lock that in place. Then all of you approached me and said, let us send men before us. Who approached Moses? People of Israel. That they may search out the land for us and bring back to us a word of the way by which we should go up and the cities by which we shall enter. No faith. You see, that request is void of faith. There's a huge faith void in that statement. It reminds me of Moses pleading with Yithro, Hobab, to go with us. Go with us, Hobab, because you know the land. You know the terrain. You would be an excellent guide for us. Remember that? We saw that last week. That was certainly a lack of faith on the part of Moses. Moses will grow in faith tremendously. In fact, we'll begin to see that tonight. That yes, he will grow in faith. But that request for his father-in-law, Yithro or Hobab, to go with them, showed that Moses wasn't absolutely confident that God can lead them. Isn't that amazing? And the same thing's happening here. Israel isn't sure that God will lead them. So we have to set about a reconnaissance mission so that we will know which way to go. The land belonged to God. He knew every valley, every creek. He knew every mountaintop. Why would Israel not trust him? Because they're very much in the flesh. And again, there's a huge void of faith. So this is how it begins. Israel determines that we should send for reconnaissance, and God said, okay, is that what you want? It's not going to be good. Now, what happens when the spies bring back an evil report? Instantly, you see, God knew the heart of Israel. He knew what was in them. Instantly, upon an evil report, they all wanted to go back to Egypt. Let us appoint for ourselves a leader so that we can go back to Egypt. Is it possible that God knew that this was their intent to begin with? What do you think? Is it entirely possible that there was, in fact, an effort on the part of the leaders of Israel, and that's why God said, send your leaders, to bring a discouraging word so that they would turn right back and go back to Egypt? Because again, we'll see this here in a few moments. Instantly upon the evil report, that's it. Let's choose another leader and head back to Egypt. You see, God is working within the camp of Israel. He's working in their hearts. He is moving to flush out that resistance, which is exactly what he does. Right? What was his determination? We'll read it here in a few moments. That generation, the leadership, that generation will die out in the wilderness because there's a void of faith. Now, God worked with them. He didn't instantly abandon them. He recognized that void of faith at Mount Sinai. But he continued to move them in that direction, hoping that they would make right choices. The choice to enter into the land to spy it out, with perhaps a conspiracy to say, the land is wonderful, the land is great, here are some grapes, wonderful, but they're giants, no use. So let's read about that evil report that came back to the people of Israel. So in we're still in chapter 13. Let's see. We can read 23 and onwards, and then we'll get into the evil report. Let's just read 23. 23 will capture what we want to look at. 23 and 24, all right. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol. What does the word Eshcol mean? Cluster. The valley of cluster. Because at Eshcol, and from there cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between two men, with some of the pomegranates and the figs. Now that must have been some cluster of grapes, right? That they had men with poles, two men, carrying this cluster of grapes and pomegranates and figs. So the land is bountiful, right? That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster which the sons of Israel cut down from there. So it's a land. It's a land that's flowing with milk and honey. The fruit is in abundance. What a wonderful thing. Verse 25 to 29 deals with the people that are there. Amalek is there. The sons of Anak. Anak is also referred to as The sons of Anak are also referred to as Nephilim. They're not truly the Nephilim of the pre-flood period. They're large men, giants, large men. It's clear that even after the flood, there were very large men on the planet, towering over Og of Bashan, right? The story of Og of Bashan, he was supposed to be 14, 15 feet tall. And there were people like that around after the flood. I'm not going to get into why were there giants or men that were very large. In their DNA of Noah, his wife, and their children, perhaps. That's besides the point. But the sons of Anak were there, and they were giants, and they were formidable. Amalek was there, and the Jebusites, and many of the very strongest of the Canaanites were positioned in the land. And they took note of that. So here is the evil report that they brought back. In fact, they brought that evil report. They basically, we're not going to read all of it, but they basically said, they're too big for us. They're like giants, we're grasshoppers. All right. And so the people began to get upset. Here's Caleb now in 30 to 33. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, we should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it. That's Caleb. Now take note of this. Caleb is the one who spoke up. The resistance began to build. The rebellion began to take root. And Caleb spoke up. Not Joshua. Caleb spoke up. Let's read what Caleb said again. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, we should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we will surely overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are too strong for us. So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone in spying it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. Now, you get the impression there that that was a response or reaction that was planned upon. I get that impression when I read it. Perhaps the only two that were not involved in this conspiracy, if I can say that, to bring an evil report and stir up the people of Israel to want to return to Egypt was Caleb and Joshua. Verse 33. There also we saw the Nephilim. They're just pointed on. These sons of Anak were not Nephilim. Nephilim did not exist at this time. If the Bible is true, they were all killed out with the flood. And I believe the Bible is true. God destroyed the Nephilim with the flood. These are not Nephilim, but they're embellishing the fact that they're giants in the land. That's what they're doing. These sons of Anak, who's a man, are Nephilim. Really stirring up Israel here. And we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. So that's the report. Caleb initiated the faith. There is a void of faith here, but not with Caleb. And of course, not with Joshua as well, because Joshua stood with Caleb. Sometimes we think it's Joshua who led this. No, it wasn't Joshua. It was Caleb who led that infusion of faith. Where there was a void, Caleb stood up and said, no. Basically, he's saying, God brought us through Egypt. Surely we'll take the land. What are these large men compared to what God has already done for us? That's the attitude of Caleb, and that's the attitude of faith. Again, there's a huge faith void in Israel, and Caleb is that infusion of faith. Let's read now. So immediately after their evil report, this is what happens. Then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. They're fully and completely stirred up, manipulated. All the sons of Israel grumbled. There's that word there, lun. All the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plunder. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us appoint a leader and return to Egypt. Now, who are they rebelling against? Moses and Aaron? They're rebelling against God. It was not Moses and Aaron that brought the children of Israel out of Egypt. It was God. And their rebellion is against God. God took this one pretty personally. He knew it was coming. He saw it coming. He went ahead of them. And so let's read about what happened. So there's a huge, again, a faith void here, a spirit of dissatisfaction that brings a person or a people to grumbling. And there's grumbling. And the grumbling in and of itself is sort of like an infection. It's kind of like the spirit of witchcraft almost. It's contagious. Contagious. And so this grumbling now is again, the 10th time. We're going to see this here in a few moments. This is the 10th time that Israel grumbled against God. So let's see what happens next. God is preparing to respond. Let's see how this whole thing pans out here. So let's read now 14, 5 to 10. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces in the presence of all the assembly of the congregation of the sons of Israel, Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, of those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. So Joshua and Caleb said, we're not a part of this. Tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord. You see, Caleb, and this is Caleb leading this, and we'll prove that in a few moments, because God spoke to Caleb after this whole thing was over. And he didn't really address Joshua. He spoke to Caleb. So Caleb and Joshua are speaking to the people. I believe it's mostly Caleb. And listen to the faith. Listen to the faith infusion that Caleb and Joshua are bringing into this whole controversy. Verse 8. If the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring, we read that just now, verse 9. Only do not rebel against the Lord and do not fear the people of the land, for they will be our prey. They will be our prey. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. All right, so this is Caleb and Joshua's response to the people. They're pleading with the people to stand in faith, fighting against that faith void in the people of Israel. But all the congregation said, stone them with stones. Then the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all the sons of Israel. See, God was paying attention. He was not unaware of what was happening. He observed how Caleb stood up and spoke faith. Joshua joined in on, Joshua stood with him. He acknowledged that Caleb and Joshua were equipped and ready to be that infusion of faith. The people said, let's stone them. Then the glory of God appeared. God is wrathful at this point. So, God takes rebellion quite seriously. It's like witchcraft, right? For rebellion is as the spirit of witchcraft. I've seen that before many, many times. I've experienced the pull towards rebellion. Praise God, once I was born again, it was more or less, God flushed me of many things when I was born again. He flushed many things out of me. And I'm not going to list the list of things that he took away from me almost in the space of a few months. He didn't take everything away from me. He left some things for me to negotiate, which I'm glad for. But one of the things that he stripped completely away from me is the tendency to rebel against authority. I always had a healthy respect for authority, always did. But as someone born again, I began to see more clearly the need for authority and the fact that we should respect authority, because Paul said it in Romans chapter 15, all authority is appointed by God. All authority. And so to rebel against authority is to rebel against God. That's something that God instilled within me very early in my experience after being born again. But many times I've experienced rebellion. I've seen it, observed it, been the blunt of it. And it's always something that God takes very personally. And it will reflect in some way or the other. God's displeasure will reflect. Often does. Sometimes it's not blatant, sometimes it's subtle, and sometimes it's pretty obvious when God responds to rebellion. Rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. Now that's something that Samuel said, and he was certainly speaking on behalf of God when he said that. So God sees rebellion on the same plateau that he sees, well, not even plateau, on the same place of descent that he sees witchcraft. How does God feel about witchcraft? He sees it for what it is. It's an incredibly contaminated practice. It is something that creates horrible pain in the lives of people. If you've ever encountered someone who has been involved in witchcraft or is involved in witchcraft, you see it. God despises witchcraft because it's the craft of his adversary. Satan's craft is witchcraft. And God sees rebellion in the same vein. And I'll express to you exactly why. Because it was Satan who rebelled against God. Rebellion did not exist until Satan rebelled against God. So whenever rebellion shows its head or rears up, God sees the devil. I'll just put it to you in that way. Wherever rebellion would manifest, God is seeing Satan. Because again, all rebellion is connected to Satan. Didn't exist before him. So rebellion is quite an issue that God deals with. And he deals with this one. Now let's read how God responds to this. So God's response. And now we're going to see Moses' courage in approaching God. Moses is going to grow in tonight's Torah portion. We're going to see him really surge forward in terms of courage, faith, and growth. So let's read how God responds to this. In chapter 14, we're going to read 11, and we'll see how far we need to go with it. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will this people spurn me? And how long will they not believe me?" See that? They believed that he existed, right? They knew he existed. They saw him, but they didn't believe him. All right, so, how long will this people not believe me, despite all the signs which I have performed in their midst? I will smite them with pestilence and dispossess them, and I will make you into a nation greater and mightier than they. So God was prepared to dispossess Israel, to destroy the nation of Israel, and through Moses initiate a new kingdom, a new nation. How does that grab you? What about all of the promises that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Was God about to nullify his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? No, he was about to amend his covenant. It would have been Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses that he would have created this people through. In other words, friends, God was well prepared to amend his plan of redemption and change things radically. The Bible would have read entirely different had Moses not intervened. So Moses here is in a position where if he went along with what God's plan was at that time, he would have become like Abraham, like Isaac, like Jacob, and would have been the father of a multitude. All of the promises given to Abraham, extended to Isaac, and then to Jacob, would have been extended to Moses. And how does Moses respond to it? Let's read. But Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear of it. For by your strength you brought up the people from their midst. And isn't that something? Moses immediately begins to consider the people of Israel and God's witness. What would the Egyptians say, God? Isn't that amazing though? Verse 14. And they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land. They have heard that you, O Lord, are in the midst of this people. For you, O Lord, are seen eye to eye, while your cloud stands over them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you slay this people as one man, then the nations who have heard of your name will say, because the Lord could not bring his people into the land which he promised them by oath. Therefore he slaughtered them in the wilderness. So Moses is thinking ahead. He's saying, God, if you were to do this, what would the inhabitants of the land say? They would say that you failed. Do you believe that this discussion is happening? That Moses is rationalizing with God? That's what's happening. All right, where did I leave off? Verse 16. Oh, we read that. But now I pray, let the power of the Lord be great, just as you have declared. That's Moses' appeal. And then Moses says this, the Lord is slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgressions, for he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and to the fourth generation. That's become an iconic verse in the Bible, right? Moses didn't apply it that way. Moses was just recognizing an attribute of God that he knew existed, right? So he declares this thing to God. He's pleading with God. It's as if he's gone before the judge of the universe, who God is, and he's making his case before God. Have you ever been to court and had to address the judge? It's not a comfortable thing, isn't it? You're on the spot. There are people that are observing you. The judge has the power to make decisions into your life. And you have to make your case. You have to plead with him. And this is what Moses is doing. So you see, Moses, who was by nature, I think, timid and a bit unwilling to take action sometimes, stood up and he put himself out there where he became that vessel between God and between Israel. He truly became the intermediator on this day, a type of Messiah. In other words, the Moses who shied away from speaking, who didn't want to go into Egypt, the Moses who didn't want to circumcise his kids because his wife Zephora didn't want it, that Moses did not reflect Messiah. The Moses who asked Yethro or Hobab to go with them so he can be their guide didn't reflect Messiah. Why not? Because there was no faith being reflected in those actions before. But here now, I think for one of the few times, we see Moses take a quantum leap forward in regards to faith and courage. The word there is emunah, a different word than our Greek word for faith, which is pistos. A different word. The word pistos means believe. Did Israel believe that God exists? Yes. But did they believe him? No. Believing God requires emunah, faith. And this is Moses. He's gone before God. He's become the intermediator between God and Israel, a type of the Messiah, and he's putting himself out there. Do you think Moses understood that God can simply just push him aside? God could have just pushed him aside. God could have said, Moses, my mind is made up. I'm going to choose Caleb instead. God could have done that. And here's what God does. Moses, he's still pleading in verse 19. Pardon, I pray, the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of your loving kindness. Just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt even until now. He ends his petition, his plea before God. And it's good. You read over those verses again, 13 to 19, you denote in Moses real intelligence, real intelligence in approaching God, one. You denote passion. You denote courage and faith. He makes his plea, and he touches God's heart. He does, in fact, penetrate and touches God's heart. So the Lord said, I have pardoned them according to your word. Isn't that something? You see how powerful faith is? You see how powerful being courageous is? How does God feel about cowardice? How does God feel about someone who expresses or reacts in a coward, unfaithful way towards God, a place of no courage? Does God take any pleasure in that? No. But he takes extreme pleasure in the one who is bold and courageous before him and will come before him and put themselves out on behalf of others. You see, Moses wasn't seeking his best interest here. If he did seek his best interest, what would he have done? Yep, make of me an entire nation. Yep. Give me a dozen wives and I'll work on that. Make of me a nation. But that wasn't Moses' attitude. What was his attitude? That of Messiah. He laid his life down. I want you to see that, brothers and sisters. He laid his life down. He put himself in a place where God could have simply said, wrong answer. And he laid himself down before God, and God responded. I have pardoned them according to your word, but indeed, as I live, all the earth will be filled with the glory of God. In other words, with Israel or without Israel, my purposes would be accomplished. The earth will be filled with my glory. Surely all the men who have seen my glory and my signs which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, yet have put me to the test these 10 times, and have not listened to my voice, shall by no means see the land which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who spurned me see it. You see that? God is prepared to continue to work with the camp of Israel. In regards to the guilty party, the ones who transgressed against him, and who do you think they were? The 10 spies. The leaders, the 10 spies. They were the first to die of the plague. See, God knew what was happening. So I want to present this to you, a hypothetical, but think about it. Before Israel approached Moses about sending a reconnaissance mission into the land, more than likely there was a meeting of the leaders. And they came up with an idea. Here's how we can go back to Egypt. More than likely. And God saw that. And God decided that he's going to walk them through this process. It was so aggravating to God that God was prepared to completely do away with all of Israel. So the very first thing he does is he acts upon the leadership, those who had come up with this scheme. Even if it wasn't a scheme, God saw it as incredibly defiling. And he removed the very first cleansing he did was the 10 spies. All right? So then now let's see what God says about Caleb. So God is going to hold the guilty party guilty. He says here Israel had spurned him, has rebelled against him effectively 10 times now. And yet there will be more examples of where Israel will rebel against him. Amazing. And here's how God responds concerning Caleb. But my servant Caleb, because he has had a different spirit, you see here, he doesn't mention Joshua. He's considering Caleb. Because Caleb was the one who began to speak, who began to confront, who put himself out there. Later on in Numbers, we will see the person Phineas. Phineas does the same thing. And God awards Phinehas a name, an eternal name, and an eternal priesthood. Caleb is in that same camp. My servant Caleb, because he had a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites live in the valleys. Turn tomorrow and set out to the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. So I love verse 24. It speaks of God's appreciation for the person who is willing to be a plug of faith, who's willing to infuse faith. And that's Caleb. Now, what did Caleb inherit? The largest portion of the land of Israel. The largest portion from the Negev in the south all the way up to Samaria, the region of Judea, became the region of Judah. Caleb was of the tribe of Judah. Caleb, the subsequent history of Caleb is that he was very active in defeating the Anakim, the giants. Later on in Joshua, we will see that Caleb is going to approach Joshua concerning the land of what became the land of Judah. And Caleb, even in his very old age, was very active in destroying the Canaanites in the land. So Caleb is the star in tonight's Torah portion. Moses stepped up considerably. I mean, he stepped up quite a bit. But Caleb is the real shining star in this Torah portion, because Caleb was willing to believe God. He was willing to say no to 10 spies. Effectively, he was willing to stand against all of Israel. Joshua stood with him. But Caleb was willing to stand against all of Israel. It was all of Israel who said, let us go back to Egypt. Let us appoint one of these 10 men as a leader to send us back to the land of Egypt. And God took special note of Caleb. Of course, we know the history of the tribe of Judah and what followed after the tribe of Judah. The entire nation of Israel, they are known as the Jewish nation. They're known as Jews because of the incredible faith that resided in the people of Judah, the tribe of Judah. We remember from the Torah portion that goes all the way back to Genesis how Judah became the leader of the tribes of Israel. How did Judah become the leader of the tribes of Israel? By faith. By faith. By being courageous. Remember the story of Judah and what happened? Right? With his daughter-in-law. He could have snuffed her out, but he didn't. He humbled himself once she confronted him, and then we see a change in Judah. And then that brought us to the point where Judah laid his life down on behalf of Israel. That's what he did. He thought that Joseph was a heavy-handed Pharaoh who had the power to kill him, which he did, and he laid himself down. He said to Jacob, his father, that I will be surety for the lad, for Benjamin. And if something goes wrong with him, it will be me. I will be responsible. That was the beginning of Judah's leadership. And as a result of that incredible act of faith and courage on behalf of Judah, we see that the tribe of Judah becomes that vessel of faith throughout Israel. And it's that way even to today. So, tonight's Torah portion is just overwhelmingly packed with things that I can go on about all night long, which I will not do. But I want us to see here the incredible value of faith. And I'm not talking about the English word faith. I'm not talking about the Greek word faith, pistis, which simply means to believe. I'm talking about the word emunah, because the word emunah goes much deeper, much deeper than the Greek word, than the English word. The word emunah implies courage, determination, resolution, commitment, faith. And that's what pleases God. Does the Bible tell us anything about that? Absolutely. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. So faith pleases God. Add some courage and determination and fearlessness to it, Yeah. You're on God's platform. Again, later on in the Torah portion here, 2 or 3 weeks from now, maybe 3 weeks from now, we'll see Phinehas. The same reality with Phinehas. Phinehas was bold, courageous, and he was willing to act out in a way that no one else was willing to act out. And God recognized Phinehas and gave him an eternal name. Effectively, he did that with Caleb as well. In that all of the tribes of Israel are still being led by the people of Judah. Judah is the leading tribe. All right, so faith, courage, determination to do things that are not natural in the fallen nature. The people of Israel, they were strong in the fallen nature. They were well grounded in terms of being void of faith. They were very strong in the flesh, very strong in the natural. They had this propensity to do whatever seemed right to them, irregardless of the God who brought them out of Egypt. Irregardless of all of the signs that God had showed them, they had this propensity to do things in their own power. That's something that we should be able to recognize in each of our lives. It exists in me. Even if I put a religious veneer on it and tack on the Holy Spirit to it, it's still the flesh. The flesh is the flesh. Doesn't matter what you dress it up in. Doing things based on your own will and determination is very much where Israel was. And when we see in the book of Judges, when Israel comes into the land, it states in 2 places that Israel did whatever seemed right in their own eyes because they didn't have a king. But God was their king. They had rejected him as king. He was not directly king in their lives, and that's our challenge. We don't see the king, right? We can't literally stand before him, but he is our king. He's very much there. It's our mission. It's incumbent upon us to make him king, to put him in that place in your life where he is king. And the only way by which you can successfully do it is through faith. Emunah, faith. Courage, determination. Then he's king. Then you don't do what seems right in your own eyes. You don't make decisions based on what seems good to you and your family and everyone else. Even though you throw on a little bit of a religious coat over it, you don't do it. You do only what God points you to. And that's the only foundation, the only basis for righteousness. And Caleb was righteous. He was righteous. And he attained to righteousness because he was willing to do the thing that was hard in the flesh. How hard was it for Caleb, do you think, to stand up against 2.5 million people and say, what's wrong with you guys? Look at what God has done here. What makes you think that these giants can stop us? What did Caleb say? They will be prey for us. I know that it was Caleb who said that. Because when he entered into the land, that was his attitude. That was his approach. He was wiping out the giants in the region of Judah, in the Negev, and in the region of Amalek, and in the foothills. And he went to Joshua. He said, Joshua, give me a little more time. And give me a little more land. That's the person of faith. Aggressive in the spirit. Not aggressive in the natural. In the natural, you're dead. You're dead to the natural. You're not giving any strength to the natural man. But in the spirit, walking by faith, you are a Trojan. You're a warrior. And that's the way we have to live our lives. And Jesus said it, that the aggressive takes the kingdom. What was he talking about? He was talking about Caleb. He was talking about Phinehas. He was talking about Zadok. He was talking about David. The aggressive, those who press in faith, will take the kingdom. So, faith. Without it, it's impossible to please God. Shabbat Shalom.